You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're talking about what happens next. What do we do next? I know that a lot of us are in a holding pattern. We feel overwhelmed, and we wonder what's going to happen. I mean, we've never been in this situation before. It's unprecedented. So what do we do next? How do we move through life? And what's the next step that we are going to honestly go through? And, you know, I find it very interesting because I feel that many of us, first off, have never experienced this. I know that a lot of people have been joking around, especially folks that are in the military, say that it's very easy to do quarantine. They say that this is something that they've experienced before pretty much, and that this is not something out of the ordinary for them. However, I think many of us that are non-military folks and some people that haven't gone through that type of sit and wait and have to wait for a situation to come about, and you could wait several days, several weeks for something to happen, a lot of us have never experienced that. And so we want to talk about making those changes. What's next? What happens when we reopen this world? What are we going to do then? And what are the things that we've swept under the rug for many of us dealing with quarantine? I think that many of us have swept things under the rug with our family dynamic, whether it's arguments or situations that we've had with certain family members. I think also dealing with the intrinsic things that we need to change in our own life, the stuff that we want to become aware of and the things that we want to honestly tackle. What are the work issues that we have put on the back burner? Because I know a lot of us are just like, hey, I'm just glad I have a job and going to work. But at the same point, I think that many of us had issues going into our work life prior to the quarantine, and those have not been addressed. What about the relationship issues that we've swept under the rug? Because I know that many of you say, well, I've been in quarantine and I love my wife, or I love my husband, I love my girlfriend, my boyfriend, what have you, but we do have some issues that we're not dealing with, and it's definitely, we're seeing it on a day-to-day basis, and it's things that we can't hide and we can't put under the rug. And so if we think about these things logically, there are definitely things that we need to work out. Also, I think the third concept that we will have to deal with is self-awareness, right? Self-awareness. And that's something that a lot of us are going to have to deal with as well, is being mindful and understanding how to be self-aware, how to take that to the next level. And I think that many of us are having these epiphany moments, right? I know that a lot of you have epiphanies in the shower, and I actually have a friend of mine that has a podcast titled Shower Epiphanies. Shout out to Art today. So, you know, it's interesting because we have these shower epiphanies. Some of you might have epiphanies in the bathroom, for God's sakes. We don't have to get graphic, but you understand what I'm talking about. But I think many of us have had what I'd call quarantine and shelter-in-place epiphanies, right? And so that's really what we're talking about today. What are the epiphanies that you've had in the situation that have changed your life forever? And that if you allow it to change your life, you will learn something more profound than you ever have. And maybe it's because we had to get quiet. And maybe it's because we had to deal with our situations. And maybe it was because, you know, we had to understand some of the things in life that were just inherently important. But I think that more often than not, we have to really look at what is it that we want to change? What are the things that have come into our mind that we have to do, that we have to change, and how can we make those changes now and things that last forever? You know, joining us here later on in the hour, Liz London. Liz is our sound alchemist, and she's going to be giving us some information, tips, and tricks on how to calm ourselves, how to de-stress, things that we can do to really get a grip on our reality. I know that many of you out there are like, you know, Ashley, you're right. I'm learning a lot, maybe too much. Maybe it's on overload. Maybe just a little stressed out by all that I'm learning. But at the same point, I'm actually getting it, but I need to figure out how to calm it down and how to really work through what I'm learning and totally get it. So Liz is going to help us with that. She's our sound alchemist, and you can find her information on ashleyburgess.com. Just click on that radio show page, and she has a group and a company called Portal to the Divine, and she can actually help you to really de-stress and understand, you know, how to deal with your thoughts, not to compartmentalize, how to deal with your stress, not to compartmentalize, and how to really make that work for you. So later on in the hour, she will be joining us. Also, don't miss Dan Nelson. Dan is our resident historian on Live Your True Life Perspectives. And so, history really does come back around full circle, right? That's why they say that history repeats itself, because we're all dealing with that, historically speaking. And, it's interesting when it comes down to anything from Corona to anything else. We've dealt with this. A lot of people compare it to the Spanish flu, and we continue to go from there. But it's interesting with Dan's stories how something small like a teapot or anything could connect people across the globe and even connect groups of people and even connect people to the president of the United States. So there's a lot of really interesting moving parts. And I think one of the best things about it is that history is interesting to learn. It's things that you can talk about at parties, but better yet, it's something to get your mind off exactly what's happening right now. But it's also something to get more interested in the history of our earth, the history of our nation. And I think that is very important, because the more we understand history, the more we understand our current situation. He will be joining us later on in the hour as well. I want to give a shout out to Reggie Harvey right now. Reggie is, he's gotten a transplant. So Reggie has gone and gotten a kidney transplant. It took place a few days ago. And he texted me at the beginning of this week and said, hey, by the way, it looks like I'm going to be going in. I'm checking into the hospital, and it looks like the next day I will be going in for a transplant. So things have worked out very well. He actually got a kidney. I don't know exactly all the information, but I know it was a 26-year-old kidney. So we'll see how all that goes. And he sounds like he's doing really well. And he will be coming out of the hospital in a few days. So he will be joining us by phone at some point, probably in the next few weeks. And it'll be good to hear from him and to hear how he's doing. But he will obviously not be coming up to the studio for a while. So let's give a round of applause, congratulations to Reggie, and to also thank the person who obviously passed away, but made it okay for their organs to be used to help other people. So that is very admirable, and we appreciate that person for doing that. So really awesome stuff there, and being able to save a life, and I guess that's the natural circle of life. And so we're really happy for Reggie. So reach out to Reggie when you can. And he's on Facebook. He'll probably be watching the show if he can. And then we'll put his link up to his website as well. Also to his Facebook page. So today we're talking about the quarantine and shelter in place, self-isolation epiphanies. And I know that some of you are surrounded by a husband or a wife. You got multiple children. You're doing the homeschooling. You're trying really hard not to drink that entire bottle of wine. And so your epiphanies might be different from someone's epiphanies who doesn't have anybody to live with, and so that they have been sequestered on their own. Some of your epiphanies may be different if it was you and a puppy dog, you and a cat, you and a bird, a lizard, whatever. And then, multiple different facets of it. Some of your epiphanies may be different. Maybe you just started dating someone right before this quarantine. Maybe you just got engaged right before this. Maybe you just got married, okay? And the beginning of that can be very interesting, learning new things about one another that you never knew, but also learning things about yourself. And what I've found is that when we're dealing with these epiphanies, it's like a mirror, okay? A lot of times we see other people's problems, right? Other people's problems are really big. Other people's problems look like, they look big. Because you know what? They're so, it's almost like a funhouse mirror, right? Where you see, it's like this huge mirror and it looks crazy. And like the person's issues look like, wow, did they not just get it? I mean, like they're acting this way. They're overwhelming. They're doing this. They're doing this. They're really irritating me. And you're seeing that, and I think a lot of times we can get very angry, or we can get cold, or we can try to avoid them. A lot of times we get resentful, but what is it that we need to be learning on the flip-flop of that? I've realized that when somebody I love and somebody I'm close to is doing something that's irritating me really badly, and they constantly do it, that there's something more to just the irritation that I need to be aware of. There's something more that I need to connect with to understand more about myself. And that can be really, really hard to be able to be super mindful to catch that. Because first off, you have to realize this isn't happening. This person's doing this, but it's not just because of you. This person's doing this because this is their deal. This is the situation. But at the same point in time, what's happening is that there's something that we're supposed to learn, and the only way that we can learn this, the only way that we can really learn a lesson is by seeing this and then basically jumping around the back end of that to figure out how does that connect us. And so that can be really challenging. I've been on some sessions this morning with clients from around the country, and, I've heard a lot of folks talking about, hey, my husband's just irritating me, and this is the situation that's been happening for a long time. And since we've been in quarantine and we're having to deal with this and we're having to homeschool the kids, it's really coming to light that we have some serious issues that we have to deal with. And I totally get it. I totally understand. But this can really be an eye-opening experience in a positive way, or it can be an ending experience. And I know I'm not saying that everybody needs to try to save their marriage, okay? I'm saying there are some marriages that probably the best thing to do is to end it, okay? But I feel like whether or not you stick in it or you end it, there's something for you to learn. And if you don't learn it now, even if you get remarried to someone else, you're going to get the same lesson again. It's just the way it works. History repeats itself. When we don't learn our lessons, they keep coming to us, right? That's just the way it is. And so really thinking about what the other people in your life are telling you, not them telling you straight up, but are telling you by their actions, by the things that they do, by the bonehead things that they do that irritate you so much. What is the connection and the extrapolation of what are you supposed to learn in this? And I think that if we can get a hold of that right now, we can begin to understand our true reality in a much more significantly timely and more technicolor way, because we actually begin to see the reality of the reason why we're here. Because I believe that everybody is a mirror to us, and we're supposed to learn from everybody. And I think especially the people that you've chosen to live with. I mean, obviously there's a reason for this. And so thinking about that, I think that it's a very telling situation when we deal with stress in our lives. It's a very telling situation what bothers us. It's a very telling situation what we have to deal with, what we need to encounter. And so I really want you to think about that today. And so if somebody is really irritating in your family, write this down, journal it. What is happening? Is it the way they talk? Is it the way they don't listen? Is there something that the way they take things for granted, or they don't listen, or they act like they're not interested, or the way they jump to conclusions? Whatever that is, I want you to really write that down and start thinking about, okay, I see their issue, and their issue is right in front of my face. But what does this imply about me? Is there something that I could change as far as my delivery? Am I taking things very personally? Is there something about me that I don't really see because it's hard to see your own personal blind spots, and that's what's irritating it? So just taking a step back and just having these epiphanies can be very powerful, and I think that it can make us much stronger and also be able to understand ourselves much more clearly. Okay, so when I return, I'll be talking about relationships, the things that we swept under the rug, the self-awareness, right? The self-awareness is so key. And really, in the end, I really want to talk about who's mirroring you. Think about who is mirroring you. And a lot of times we think that when someone's mirroring us, it's going to look identical. Well, that's just not the case. Okay, mirroring can be very different. I think everything on this planet is basically a mirror. The way that someone interacts with us, the way we interact with somebody, and the way the other person comes back and interacts with us again, the way that someone's thinking, the way that we accept that thought or we don't accept that thought. Very interesting stuff. So stay with me, because you know what? We'll be back. So Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back this time. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're talking about quarantine and shelter-in-place epiphanies. And what have you learned so far that's a little bit interesting, possibly a little bit overwhelming, and a little bit of something maybe you didn't want to see? I know that many of us have been dealing with things that, well, probably stuff that we swept under the rug a bit back, whether it was relationships or whether it was work involved, whether it was our job, whether it's about our spouse, whether it's about ourselves, because I think all of this goes back to us. When we have issues, it's with us. It's things that we haven't dealt with. And so if your spouse is kind of getting in your face and there's some issues going on, stepping back and really taking an assessment of how that connects with you is powerful. What we mostly do, and what I see more often than not, is that people look, and it's okay to understand the problems of someone else. So if somebody else is having some issues, it's good to understand the issues that they have, right? Because that's just the way life is. We need to understand other people. However, what I've realized is that if we just focus on their issues and not our own issues, we lose sight of our life. Because I can sit there and think about it. We can get a diagnosis for someone. We can understand what they're dealing with. But how are we dealing with our own life? And that's what I want you to really think about, is that a lot of times we look at someone else's problems, and it totally makes sense, because someone else's problems is easier to deal with than our own problems. Think about it. I mean, other people's problems are so much easier to deal with because we think we see everything. I mean, our problems must look like easy for people to deal with too. I mean, think about it. Your spouse must see you and your problems like, oh, this is so easy. I wish I had to deal with that. You see, the way we see things are very interesting. And we see everybody as being so much easier to deal with their issues. And why don't they just do this? And why don't they just get their head out of their butt? Well, I want you to think about it, because when somebody is doing something that really does irritate us, what does that say about us? And why do we get irritated by it? And have we had an open dialogue to understand that? I think that it's easier nowadays. People just feel like I'll just gloss it over, or I don't want to deal with confrontation, or I don't want to deal with conflict. I mean, some of you have been dealing with conflict from your mom or your dad since like the day you were born, and you've never really discussed it because you don't want to rock the boat. And now that you're in this quarantine and you're dealing with this, and you might be a caregiver, it's really bubbling up to the surface, almost something you can't even deal with. Have you really focused on that energy? Have you focused on what you need to do to really work through those issues? Because those are the issues in life that get in the way of our happiness. And I want you to think about it. When somebody does something wrong to you, when somebody has done something wrong to you in your past, the reason why therapy and coaching works so well is that we actually walk through that. Because why should you have to pay for the rest of your life for something that somebody did to you when you were XYZ old? And why does that have to impact you every single day since then? And see, most people are dealing with that right now, whether it's something that mom did or something that dad did or something that your brother did or your sister did or your aunt, your uncle, and we have never dealt with this. And so that stuff that took place a long time ago that the person probably had no right to do, that is still coloring your life, and a guilty and an angry and a resentment. All of that right there is happening. And I think you need to like step back and think about it, because I think that a lot of the feelings have probably bubbled up to the surface, especially now, because we were being able to get really lost in our jobs before, right? We were being able to get lost in our busyness. It's easy to get lost in our busyness, right? Because if we're lost in our busyness, I don't have to worry about dealing with anything. I don't have to worry about the big picture. I can get lost in my busyness right now, and I can ignore all the big issues in my life. But what happens when this stuff happens again? Or what happens when I slow down? What happens then? And that's something that you really, really, truly want to think about. And that's something that we actually have to really focus on and understand what to do next. So when we return, we're talking more about what you can do to work on your work, your relationship, your self-awareness, and all that in between. And some other folks are going to be joining us just a minute. Live Your True Life Perspectives. We'll be back this time. 2 Shades.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're talking about shelter at place. We're talking about quarantine epiphanies. What we've learned. I know, it's been a learning curve, huh? There's been some things that we've realized that we just can't sweep under the rug any longer. There's some things that we realize, well, gosh, it's starting to stink. There's some things that we need to deal with. I know that many of us don't like confrontation. We don't like conflict. It's something we don't want to deal with. It's something we don't like to do. We were taught at an early age that we weren't supposed to talk about how we feel. We're supposed to just cover it up, suck it up, and deal with it. But that's just not the way that we live a good life. And I'm not talking about having fights and having arguments. I'm not talking about getting out of control and having the cops called. I'm talking about getting right with yourself and figuring out what is it that you need to be working on, that you have swept under the rug, the busyness that you've gotten yourself into in the last how many years, that it's time to really focus on you. I think that if anybody out there has ever taken a vacation, and it's been like a long time, like it's been years, and then you finally get to take a vacation for a week, and you go out and you go to some small island. And it's interesting because trying to decompress is so hard. And you get there and you check in, and it's like everybody's so freaking slow. I mean, like the check-in takes you hours to get in there. And it's like in the first night you're eating, it's like it takes hours just to order. And it's just so foreign to you. And it's stressing you out. And eventually, over the period of time, you finally calm down and begin to accept the reality. Because it's not going to happen any faster. You can get anxious. You can get upset. You can do all that, but what good is that going to do? It's going to do nothing. And I realized that in this quarantine, when we fight this stuff, it's the same thing. When we're fighting this stuff, we're going through the same thing. So what is it that you need to deal with? What are some of the issues that you've seen right now by dealing with family? Maybe there's some interactions with you and your kiddo that, well, it's just not acceptable. Maybe your child has gotten very combative. Maybe there's some anger issues there. Maybe we've wanted to overlook that. You know, maybe you've realized that after the divorce that, you know, your children are not happy. There's a lot of things that are going on, and maybe there needs to be some real communication time. And what I'm saying is the only way that we can begin to deal with our issues is to communicate and to open the line of communication. If we don't do that, we haven't done anything, and that's what we need to begin to do today. Okay, guys? But first off, we need to de-stress a little bit. We need to focus a little bit. We need to get our mind mentally there, and we need to create that space. Now we're going to be talking to our sound alchemist, Liz London, the creator of the Portal to the Divine, where she can help us with breathing exercises and other things so that we can de-stress and really just understand our life better and be more present. Liz, great to have you on Live Your True Life Perspectives.
Greetings to you, and thank you everyone for being here today. So I want to introduce some principles of sound today to everyone, and primarily sound is the creative force of the universe. And so previously we explored the use of our voice with sighing as a way to connect our breath to manifestation. But first I'm going to introduce you to some basic principles of sound. We can trace sound to a primary quotation in an important historical source, the Bible, which reads, "In the beginning was the Word, or sound, and the Word became flesh." So some principles of sound are this. So sound travels as a wave, and sound waves can actually be measured by cycles per second, which is also known as hertz. If something moves at 10 cycles per second, it's 10 hertz. These are known as frequencies. Very slow waves travel slowly and make very deep sounds. Very fast waves travel quickly and make higher sounds. Now, the human ear can detect 20 cycles a second to around 20,000 cycles per second. Dolphins create sounds at 180,000 cycles per second. So there are many sound frequencies that us as humans are unable to detect with our ears. Now, everything vibrates in the universe or resonates. The planets, ourselves, so everything in essence is creating sound. And everything inside and outside our body vibrates and resonates. So when we are vibrating out of our natural ease, it is also known as discord or inharmony or discomfort. So then if something is out of tune, we can shift it through sound and retune it into a new frequency. So this is the basis of all sound healing, shifting our frequencies. Now, the two most powerful tools I know of for frequency shifting are interrelated. The first is creating sounds with our own voice, which is a form of vibroacoustics. And in the coming weeks, we'll expound on this. However, for now, let's explore our primary method of perceiving sound, our ability to hear. This is listening to sounds through our ears, brain, nervous system, and our body. Sound goes into our ears, into our brain, affecting our central nervous system. That's our heart rate, our brain waves, our respiration are all affected by the sounds we hear. But today, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to use listening as a powerful tool for shifting our awareness or frequency. So let's get started with our listening exercises. Begin by closing our eyes, taking some nice deep breaths, and first we're going to tune into the immediate sounds of our own body. You may be hearing your breath, you might be hearing the blood going through your circulatory system, or your tummy might be rumbling. Now take another deep breath, and now I want you to become aware of any sounds in your immediate vicinity, your body or energy fields. As you begin to expand your listening, expand the field that you're listening to, so you begin to hear perhaps the sounds of anyone sitting next to you, something in the room, or a clock, or anything that you noticed, and open up your hearing more. Extending it to hearing something else. Maybe it's someone discussing something in the next room, an airplane. So if we can hear it, we can project our consciousness to it. So conscious listening is an excellent way to expand our awareness and our consciousness just through listening. Now bring our listening back to the immediate vicinity of the room that you're in. Now bring your attention back to listening only to your physical body and your immediate field. Now take a deep breath. Can you perceive that listening shifts, and as listening shifts, so does your consciousness? As you shift your sound, you literally change your perception of reality. So let's take a nice deep breath in and come back into the room and open your eyes. Can you feel the difference as you opened your ears to sound? Now let's make a note of this shift. You can do this many times during the day to increase your sensitivity to sound. So today we learned the basis of sound, and that sound is a wave, and that we are all operating at different frequencies, and we can shift those frequencies through our breath, listening and becoming aware of the sounds within and around us. Next week we'll be exploring some additional concepts about sound and other exercises using sound, assisting us in shifting our frequencies. Thank you.
I love the inspiration that Liz gives us on that, because a lot of us don't really understand exactly the implications of sound, right? And so to understand the sound wave and understand how that directly relates to us as a human being and how that interfaces with us is very powerful. And she's going to get into some really cool stuff, but you got to get the build up here, right? You got to get the build up. It's like you got to get, the how to. You have to understand how to run the machine before you can run the machine. So we're going to be talking more about that. She's going to bring in some really neat stuff that's really going to put things in perspective, help with y'all's meditations, as well as really calming that mind and helping you focus on what matters. Now it's time to talk about history. And history to me is always interesting because, as you know it, if you're a history buff, you know that history repeats itself. And so now we have Dan Nelson. Dan owns The Ancestor Genealogy. He's our genealogist. He's our resident historian here at Live Your True Life Perspectives. Dan, great to have you on LYTL. How are you doing?
Doing great, Ashley. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So I'm interested in how you're connecting all the dots today, because your stories, they really do transcend between time and place and through families and presidents and everything else.
Yeah, there's a lot of connections there, and we'll touch on some of them that probably will make us appreciate that sheltering in place is a lot less crazy than some of the times back then, what they were dealing with in the midst of the Civil War.
Well, I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah, well, we have the conclusion today. So we built this mystery up, as you said. But so anyways, this silver teapot, just to remind everybody, we know it went from Newcastle, England, to Independence Hall, to Oxford, Mississippi, and finally it resides today in Enid, Oklahoma. And it moved from the Thompson family to my Smither family. So we'll go back here in time, and it's 1864, and the Thompson home in Oxford, Mississippi, was torched by the Union Army. And so Kate Thompson and her daughter-in-law were still living in the house, and the daughter-in-law had just given birth, still confined to the bed. The Union soldiers carried the bed out and put it in the lawn. Fortunately, someone remembered that the baby was still in the house and made a dramatic rescue of the baby. I actually found the story written by the lady that rescued the baby, in her old age, she wrote this story up. Meanwhile, Jacob, he's up in Canada, Jacob Thompson, trying to arrange for peace with the wealthy Northerners. Failing that, he's supposed to disrupt Union operations, however he may be able to do it. And so he ends up trying to rescue Confederate prisoners that were housed on an island in Lake Erie. He'd actually commandeered a vessel to do that, but failed at that attempt. But he was linked to all sorts of plots, and you can find evidence from the papers back in the day that he was either a master saboteur or that he was just a misunderstood peace seeker. But on his way up to Canada, he actually was recognized in Portland, Maine, where he was waiting for a boat, and the Secretary of War was about to have him arrested when he heard of this. Well, President Lincoln, his buddy, Jacob Thompson's buddy, said, "No way, we're not doing that," and said he can leave the country unmolested. Well, this, while it may have shown the connection between Lincoln and Jacob Thompson, it enraged the Secretary of War, and it's written that basically it was sort of the last straw, and that he put into place a conspiracy to remove Lincoln from the presidency. This was the Northern radicals that were doing this. Well, then it all changed because Lincoln was assassinated, and everything got even crazier. So they sort of pulled together a plot, the Secretary of War in Washington, where they charged Jefferson Davis and his commissioners in Canada, which includes Jacob, with planning the assassination. They got perjured testimony by using bribery, and there was a $100,000 reward offered for Jefferson Davis and $25,000 for our buddy Jacob Thompson. He was accused of treason and complicity in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So, not exactly a good place to be in the world at that point in time, since a lot of people wanted to quickly grab and hang anybody involved in that. So Jacob wanted to go to Washington, D.C., demand a trial, clear his name, but his friends wisely persuaded him not to do this. Meanwhile, Kate had heard that Jacob was dead, and then a message arrives from Canada, and she'd received a message from Jacob saying she needed to bring a receipt for the $200,000 that he'd invested in British stocks and make her way to Canada. So another descendant wrote about how she made it through the Union line. With forged papers, Kate started up the Mississippi by packet steamer. In Memphis, she was sent ashore with other passengers, and behind a screen with a lady attendant, she was stripped to the skin. When her corset, into which she had sewn the receipt, was handed to the inspecting guards, she told the joke. Well, it must have been a good joke because the soldiers tossed the garment back over the screen, and she was able to continue up the river. There was one more inspection point to be passed in Cairo, Illinois, and she was ready for this. Now, you have to remember back then, people's teeth didn't last as long as they do today, so she had actually had a partial upper plate made in Germany. So she took the receipt, turned it into a tiny wad of paper, and put it in the roof of her mouth, and then put the plate over it. And she was able to get through the lines of this receipt. She made it through the case. So she'd sort of become an iron magnolia, this Southern belle, by sneaking through the lines that way. So she got up there. They fled to Europe, and fortunately, Jacob was cleared of the conspiracy charges. In 1869, they came back to America, and they moved to Memphis just to start over to begin a new life. Jacob Thompson got into some trouble a few more times, but basically did all right, and he was, when he passed away, they flew the flags at half-mast, much to the chagrin of many Northerners. So in conclusion, it would have been financially easy for Jacob Thompson to acquire the silver teapot with its Independence Hall claim to fame. It also makes sense the Thompsons would give the teapot to the Smither family, but would it be close enough to name a child after Kate Thompson?
That Jacob gets into some trouble, I'll tell you that.
He does. He was, of course, he had a lot of money, and when you got a lot of money, sometimes you dig yourself out of trouble a little easier.
Totally. It's a lot easier to get out of there, get out of jail free card, right? Literally.
That's right. He had his connections.
Well, looking forward to next week. Can you give us a quick snippet of what we're looking forward to?
Well, it'll be another good story. I'm sort of debating between a story about a gal named Herod or Herodias, who's quite an eventful life, and that's probably what I'll go with. I might save that for Mother's Day month of May, but that's where I'm leaning towards now.
Okay, well, I can't wait. I know you're going to have a story for us. It's going to be interesting. There's going to be a cast of characters. So looking forward to hearing from you next week, Dan. Have a great day.
You too. You guys can reach out to me at dansgenealogy.com.
Awesome. Well, stay tuned. We'll be right back. Live Your True Life Perspectives. We'll be back this time. 2 Shades.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking about quarantine epiphanies, about, these epiphanies that we have when we're not being as busy as we usually are, when we don't have as many places to go, we don't have many things to pick up. It does change life a little bit, right? When you're not driving to 5 other places in a day and you're not taking care of this and you're not working at the office till 7 p.m., all of a sudden your life starts switching and you start seeing things that, well, some of the things you might see, it's like, wow, that was really pretty, or it's really nice to spend more time with my kids, or it's really nice to see my spouse more. But some of the stuff you might see might be, well, not so pretty. You might realize that you've been sweeping some stuff under the rug for a long time. I mean, first off, maybe your emotions, your feelings. Maybe some stuff that happened a while back that you never got over, some resentments. Maybe the fact that things aren't working and there's something that's just not working and you've been trying to act like it does. I've had some clients recently say, before the quarantine, they were both working all the time, taking care of things, and somebody would come home at 9 o'clock from work and someone else was working late nights and, they go to bed. One would go to bed on the couch. They've been doing that for years. And now with the quarantine where they're all working from home, like this whole setup doesn't work anymore because it's very obvious that there's something not right. You see what I'm saying? I mean, so it's like some of you might be having some real come to Jesus conversations right now where it's like, I didn't want to see that. I don't want to see that at all. And I know that it can be overwhelming because when the family dynamic is a little out of whack, and especially when you don't want to deal with confrontation, or the biggest thing is that you don't even know where to begin. And I think that a lot of us have that water under the bridge. And I've heard people talk about, well, hey, I'm cleaning out my closet. And I hadn't cleaned out my closet in 10 years. And I found this stuff that I could never wear again. And, I had stuff from high school or college or whatever. And that's one thing. Okay, so think about the closet clean out. But think about the life clean out. Think about the relationship clean out. Think about the marriage clean out. I mean, it's one thing to clean out your closet, but there's a lot of stuff that's looming over here. And so, I've heard from folks, they're like, it just got overwhelming. And if that's where you are right now, you got to take it one moment at a time. What is the one thing that we can start working through right now that might help us propel to open the lines of communication so that we can continue this relationship in a positive way? I'm not saying that somebody sleeping on the couch right now is going to change immediately. I'm not saying that. We have a long way to go with that because it took a long time to get there, and there's been years where it's been going that way, and nothing's changed, right? And because of your timeline and what you were doing, you were able to avoid dealing with it, right? Because there was always some excuse. We don't have enough time. Your work schedule, I'm working 6 days a week. It's not going to work. So right now it's the time to really start thinking, what do I need to work on? And first off, why have you been waiting so long to work on it? And I get it. I'm not saying anything. I'm not making judgment calls at all. There's no reason for judgment here. But what I'm saying is like now it's time. It's time more than ever to jump up and say, okay, I'm going to try to work on at least one emotional issue in my marriage or in my family, either the family dynamic. Maybe there's an issue with mom or dad. Maybe there's an issue with your kids. And sit there and deconstruct that and figure out, okay, first off, how did we get here? How did we get all the way down this road? And why are we all the way down this road? And why have we been avoiding it? What's the big elephant in the room? What do we need to work on? And I'm not asking you to think about what they need to work on. I'm saying, what do you need to work on? And I'm sure part of it is them working on it as well. But what do they need to work on, but in relationship to you? Another thing is if somebody's upsetting you, their attitude, their actions are upsetting you, why is it upsetting you so much? What's the trigger for you? Why is it triggering you to be angry and upset? There's something behind that, and we need to find out that information because otherwise it's going to fester and we're not going to learn anything from it. Do you see what I'm saying? We're not going to learn anything from it. It's just going to fester, and it's not going to produce the information that it needs to produce. And last but not least, remember, when we deal with our issues, we allow ourselves to have clarity. Okay, when we're not dealing with our issues, we can't work on the broader things. We can't work on purpose or finding the inner child or doing any of that stuff that's really deep. We're just trying to mitigate drama. And so right now, I want you to really think about that. What is one or two things that you've had quarantine epiphanies with, and what are you willing to do about them? What work are you willing to do personally to overcome this issue? By the way, we'll be back next week, and we'll be talking more about this and how you can clean out this and make changes in your life. We want to also shout out to Reggie Harvey again and tell him congratulations on his transplant. And we also thank the person that gave him the organ as well. That's amazing. That's giving life. Live your true life perspectives. We'll be back this time. 3 shakes.